Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Jets FM on the OFN as the New York Jets continue to rebuild a roster that just a couple of weeks ago sure looks different, doesn't it, Jan?
Absolutely. Definitely different. Some good, some bad, and I guess to say a whole lot of questions right now.
Yeah, really the big news since the last time we spoke, it's all about Robbie Anderson. Breshad Perriman replaced Anderson in about 2 seconds. So good to see Joe Douglas had a backup plan all ready to go. There's been war of the words, I guess, in the media since then. Boomer Esiason saying one thing, Robbie Anderson saying another. Even Dan Leberfeld at Just Confidential weighed in and tweeted about how he thinks this is a negative slant on somebody in the New York Jets front office who probably talked to Boomer, allowed Boomer to go ahead and say what he said regarding the contract that the Jets had supposedly offered to Robbie Anderson. So there's a little bit of this stuff going on. It happens in New York, but let's talk about Robbie Anderson. And first of all, because I think we have to try to, in my opinion, and you just quickly give me your feelings, and so we can kind of move on and break this down one way or the other, in whether or not you believe that the Jets offered the 4 years.
It's a good question. I think they probably had conversations in that regard. Now, whether or not that was a formal offer, I'm not sure. I think that they potentially were maybe willing to go for 40 at one point in time, but question as to whether or not the actual offer of that amount was ever made. And also, the other caveat I'll add in there, as we've discussed a lot, is the one hallmark that's been the organization since Douglas came in is the lack of leaks.
Sure.
You haven't heard a whole heck of a lot of anything that's going on, including signings or players they're letting go, until it actually happens.
Yeah.
It's not as if in the years past where there was a lot of whispers and innuendos. This was a situation where there was not a lot of information. We knew Anderson was out there. I mean, my view in terms of hopefully bringing him back, and that was kind of my hope the entire time, was to bring him back, and especially based upon the type of contract he signed and the breakdown of the dollars seemed to be in line with the rumors of what Douglas was willing to go to. Though I don't know necessarily if actually the 4-year offer was ever put on the table for Anderson.
Well, here, look, what I have to believe, though, and even if the Jets offered what they offered, it really was in line contractually with what Carolina offered. It was just 2 years less. Still pretty much the same numbers dollar-wise. So I think, in my opinion, Robbie Anderson could have stayed with the Jets if he wanted to. And I just think he just preferred to go play for his old coach and maybe give himself another opportunity for a much bigger payday in the next couple of years. That's it's from what I've seen. I think if he wanted to stay in New York, I think he'd still be in New York.
It could be. I mean, I do think he definitely wanted to be here originally. I think if they had signed him earlier on, he clearly would have stayed once Matt.
But remember, he wanted free agency.
The opportunity existed for him to reunite with his old coach. That swayed him. But I do still think as time wore on, if the Jets had really proffered an offer to him, I do think he probably would have stayed.
Yeah, but again, he wanted free agency. So he
wanted early on in free agency, right? Well, once we kind of got to the initial stages of it, I still think there was an opportunity for him to stay, especially as we saw what happened in the marketplace, other than what happened with Amari Cooper.
Well, yeah, I mean, if he was going to get offered a huge contract, if he was going to get a big contract, that's different. But neither one of us wanted to give him a big contract.
No,
so that's the difference. Is that I agree with you. If the Jets had offered him like $20 million a year, then he'd be with the Jets. But my point is that both sides, the dollar figures were pretty close. That the difference was Robbie Anderson just preferred, based on that, since he wasn't getting blown away by the Jets offer, he wasn't getting some ridiculous amount that we don't think he deserved. that, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and try myself with my former coach. So I can't blame him for that, of course, but I also don't blame Joe Douglas.
Look, I wanted him. I wanted him here. I wanted him here. I think he showed signs last year that he was becoming the type of receiver that we wanted him to be. So I am disappointed that he is not returning, for lack of a better term.
Yes, but again, that's and I agree. Difference is there's no one to blame. That's why he didn't want to be here, so it happens. What I was very pleased about was the response, the fact that it happened quickly. They get themselves a player. Now this is going to be Perryman. This is going to be this is like a boom or bust signing. Perryman came into the league, injured his first year, didn't play, and then was pretty inconsistent for his time in Baltimore after that. Never lived up to his first round billing. He was a bust. Let's just put it that way. He was a bust in Baltimore. He goes to Cleveland, and all of a sudden something happened. And within a limited space, in that half a season, at 6-game stretch in Cleveland, he found something, his confidence, whatever. And then he gets the gig in Tampa. Still doesn't get the opportunity though, and I didn't blame Tampa. They had a pretty good receiving core, and he really didn't prove himself anyway. But he just couldn't find a way to get on the field. Injuries happen. He gets on the field, and he dominates and shows that what he did in Cleveland, he was actually capable of doing that again in Tampa. Now, has he done it over 16 games? Has he done it with the spotlight on him? Has he done it in New York? These are things we don't know, but I like the fact that the Jets didn't have to overpay for him. And we know the Jets are still going to go out and get themselves a first or second round receiver in the draft. So we know that's still happening anyway. So I think this is a gamble well worth it. And if it pays off, then I think we'll forget about Robbie Anderson pretty quickly.
I think it was a nice pivot by Douglas to get Perriman. Clearly, there was conversations that were ongoing throughout, so they could pivot in that direction if they needed to. As you said, he hasn't done it for a full year. We didn't see much of anything until early on, or until the latter part of last year when he had that 5-game stretch. So the jury's out. But like a lot of the contracts, Douglas seems to be maintaining that flexibility for the future of only either giving out 1-year deals or giving deals where he could get out of the contract after 1 year. So if Perriman blows up, then Douglas may have a difficult time signing him for the future. And if the signing proves not to be a good signing, and the Jets clearly need other weapons at the receiver core, because right now it's only really Jamison Crowder. We don't think Enunwa was going to be back, or if he is, he'll be a shell of himself.
That's where the draft pick comes in.
That's where the draft, right? That's what I say. The draft pick at number 11 starts to maybe change the focus from offensive lineman. So I still think that needs to be a focus to receiver, but it is a very deep receiving crew. But it gives the Jets some flexibility by adding somebody without having to necessarily reach. Though at 11, I do think we talked about CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy a lot as being possible candidates.
Yeah, there won't be any reaching for the Jets if they decide to go receiver with their first pick. Now the question is, people are talking about now with Anderson gone, even though we're replacing with Perriman, the Jets might go after a couple of receivers in the draft. I don't think that's necessary. I still think it would be a good idea to re-sign Demaryius Thomas at a cheap price if they can do that, and then use up one of their top picks on a receiver. You still have Vincent Smith, who I think they like. He's a talented kid. So, you got Berrios who's returning kicks. I just think there's just so much room you have in that receiver room. But you know what? We'll see. I mean, there's still time to either resign. If they don't resign anybody by the draft, then it is possible they spend a couple of draft picks on receivers. But we know they'll get one, because let's keep in mind, Herndon's coming back next year. You have Griffin. You got Bell. So this is still so the Jets have something that other teams don't. They have a really good combination of a star running back and a very talented tight end, as long as he can stay healthy. So not a lot of teams have that. So it's not like the Jets have to go out there and bust their butt trying to find 3 or 4 more receivers. One more impact receiver will do. And then I think they're in good shape. But again, then we can start talking about other things like the offensive line. getting another cornerback, and obviously seeing if you can add another edge rusher.
Well, I think you said the key word is impact, right? They have lots of receivers. I don't know whether or not they have lots of good receivers, and they do need an impact receiver. And even with Anderson, you and I both felt that they still needed another impact receiver.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's gonna come. So I can't wait for that to happen. I know there are certain people that are trying to do everything they can to push the draft out of that window of late April. I still don't think the NFL is going to do it. I don't think they're going to budge. They could. Everybody else seems to cave in. I just think that, look, everybody has to deal with it. They can say what they want about, well, and look, we're Jet fans. And if anybody's going to have a disadvantage, you would think it would have come from New York with everything that's going on in New York. I just think it's overblown. I just think it's a way, once again, for people. And I even heard somebody use once again the word bad optics. Just, this is the only thing we have going as fans right now. And I think by the time we even get to the draft, I think, especially if things go well by the timeline of Easter that we're hearing, let's keep our fingers crossed that will be already people will already be talking about, well, how much longer do we have to wait for the NHL and the NBA seasons to, kind of get back into swing of things, and when will the Major League Baseball season begin? So I still have a lot of hope that the draft is not going to be moved.
I think right now we don't know what anything's going to be timing-wise because it's almost impossible. But as you said, we know that Roger Goodell is pushing for the draft to stay the 23rd to the 25th. There's been some talk about separating it even further in terms of number of days for which the draft occurs. The GMs all appear to be of the viewpoint that they want to move it back. But Goodell is the one who's now pushing to maintain it at the time frame. And I think part of that is because there's nothing else going on. There's no other captive audiences. They'd have a captive audience just focused on that. The ratings would likely be through the roof. There'd be a lot of logistics to work out in terms of, announcing the picks and live cut-ins to some of the picks potentially, because you're not going to have them in the same location. And we did see the last couple of years that some athletes don't show up to the draft anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They have their own private parties. So
come on.
This would almost be like a couple of hundred potential private parties and have to figure out all the logistics. But I think Roger Goodell's viewpoint is it would be a ratings bonanza to maintain it as of the current dates of the 23rd to the 25th, even though that there's been disruption in terms of the scouting that normally would happen this time of year leading into the draft.
Okay, now also the Jets added Patrick Owusu to their linebacking crew. A very interesting signing from Baltimore because Owusu was a teammate of C.J. Mosley, and Owusu, an undrafted player, really made a name for himself as a special team performer. Played on the outside. Mosley comes to the Jets. Owusu moves to the inside, has a bad year last year, taking over from Mosley. So he comes back now to the Jets, to the outside position, which I'm sure he'll land. And this is looking more and more like Greg Williams is putting together a 3-4 defense.
Sure, it looks like it. I mean, there's a lot of linebackers there. I mean, I really don't think it's going to have an impact on Avery Williamson because of the type of linebackers they've added. But I would still like to see Mosley and Williamson in the same linebacking crew together. I just think it's a lot of depth. The one thing we don't know is the salary. And probably at worst, you would probably think that he's going to be a special team player, rather than necessarily one who slots in a lot, but he'll have a role if they rotate linebackers to maintain the 3-4 front.
Well, they are loaded with linebackers, but look, the Jenkins signing, things didn't work out for Robbie Anderson, but they worked out for Jenkins. Really, really good deal for the Jets to have been lucky enough to retain Jenkins for 1 year and just like $5 million. So again, another quality linebacker, someone good in the locker room.
Agreed. Look, we still know we need an outside pass rush. That's something that's a key that they still need to add. He's got a couple of sacks the last couple of years. So, with Williams' scheme, you can see him coming off the edge a lot to try to create pressure. But I would still like to see a true pass rushing outside defensive end, which there's
We
one
all
still left
would.
in the market.
Yep.
So I don't think that neither you nor I think they're actually going to land him.
No. Look, they're just going to have to get lucky in the later rounds, the mid rounds. They're going to have to find, more than likely, it's going to have to be a linebacker. And they're out there. And we'll talk more about those players as we get closer to the draft. But again, nice to see that the linebacking crew, at least for now, looks like it's working and developing into a pretty good unit. And also keep in mind, Henry Anderson was moved to the Jets because he didn't fit in the Colts 4-3 scheme, and so he's even a better fit in a 3-4. So I think that we're pretty confident that a majority of what we're going to see next year is going to go back to being that 3-4 defense that Greg Williams has coached for most of his career. As far as the offensive line, we just don't know what's going to happen to Brian Winters still. So at this point, Winters is on the team, and as long as he's there, then, I guess it gives, and maybe this is one of those situations where Joe Douglas is going to wait until after the draft to see how things go. I mean, if he doesn't go with an offensive lineman, if he doesn't get the guy he wants with that first-round pick, maybe that's the reason he wants to keep Winters for next year.
I was thinking the same thing and just about to say the same thing. I think the draft haul, and depending on what round and the type of talent that they get, may largely drive what ends up happening with Brian Winters.
All right, and pretty much I think everything else that we've heard is I think we're now down to the draft. I don't really, taking a look at what else that could possibly happen now that Jenkins and Anderson and those situations are done. I think things are going to be pretty quiet now between now and the draft. I don't expect the Jets to make any big signings. They're not going to spend half of their remaining salary cap space on Jadeveon Clowney. So I think things are going to be pretty quiet between now and the next time probably we talk in a couple of weeks, just before the draft.
I would think so. I mean, maybe we'll get some players around the edge or some fill-ins. As you said, the only thing that could happen is maybe something happens with Winters. Maybe they use that to free up salary. Maybe they trade to get somebody. So that's the only thing I can think of. But other than that, I can't really expect a lot of other stuff that's going to happen based upon what we've seen to date.
Yeah, the only other trade possibility that would make sense for the Jets would be if they decided, but again, I don't think it's happening because they have to give up draft picks, would be the Washington trade for Williams. I just don't see that happening.
Williams.
What's that?
I was going to say Williams is a very viable candidate in terms of them trying to make a run at. But the one thing I would say is that if they believe that Washington is really just going to move on, then I could see them not wanting to do anything now and just waiting and seeing what happens then.
What would you give up for him? Because Douglas.
I've heard the third is the one. I mean, Washington probably wants more. I think you would give up a third, wouldn't you?
Yes. Once we start talking about second round, I balk. Because we're talking about salary too. So if the Jets can get away with a third, knowing they're going to have to spend some money on him. Now, whether or not it's just a third, I don't know. It could be a third, and maybe we give him something next year, maybe a fourth or a fifth. I don't know. But as long as that third round pick is as high as it goes, I'm okay with that. I mean, the Jets have enough salary cap space to fit him in.
I would potentially give up a third. I'd love to obviously rather give up a fourth and see what happens. But if you're going to get him and lock him up, I mean, the thing is, don't forget, he didn't play all of last year. So that clearly has to be considered a risk for a guy missing a year on the offensive line. Granted, his body got a chance to heal up, but missing a year in terms of the timing and everything else that goes along with being an offensive lineman and the physical nature of the game, that would slightly concern me for him not seeing any time at all.
Yeah. Well, look, that's probably the only big move besides the two cap moves, Winters and Williamson. And I think we both believe that they're not going to be cut before the draft, and they may not be cut at all. So, I could see Williamson having his contract restructured. I think that could happen, but who knows? I mean, he's coming off an injury. Maybe the Jets will be just content. Still a lot of money, but right now I guess they could afford him. So, But it does look nice, doesn't it? When you can have a linebacking crew, if you go to a 3-4, where you can go with Williamson, Jenkins, Mosley, and then you throw in some of those depth guys. And Owusu, by the way, is a good blitzer, as is Marquise Christian, by the way, the safety that they picked up from the Rams. He's also a good blitzer. So and both guys are good special teams performers too, Owusu and Christian.
Agreed. And I think you're seeing that they've added guys in that fit the scheme, as opposed to vice versa. And they know what kind of scheme, obviously, Williams is going to use. They want guys that are edge rushers, given the current construction of the front, the defensive line.
And then the other thing, too, is backup quarterback. That could definitely happen before the draft.
Agreed.
And what are they thinking of doing with their backup running back room? What's that going to look like? So, those are probably the small moves that we could see happening before the draft. So. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. Would you be content with Simeon coming back?
I mean, I think we were fairly happy with him last year. Granted, we didn't see much because he got injured, but I don't know if there's that many better options that are out there.
Well, what if Andy Dalton? Because Dalton's going to get cut, and when he gets cut, that means he could sign. And where he's going to, what's going to happen is he's going to sign somewhere, and he's going to have to sign for something like $5 million. That's it. He's not going to get a lot of money. So would you bring? I mean, I would bring an Andy Dalton on board as long as he was content with the backup role.
And I think they think their intent may be to wait the market out a little bit and see what happens.
Matt Moore's been the big name, so right? He's the one that we've been hearing the most of. So, all right, sounds good, Jan. Appreciate it. Once again, if we don't have any blockbuster moves, especially from outside the organization, to force us on the air again, we will probably do a draft preview show sometime in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll hear something by the time we talk again and when the NHL season's starting again.
I hope so.
What do you think?
I'm thinking it's leaning. Look, there's a couple of things. I know some people have already talked and blogged and sent stuff out about canceling the season. The one quote unquote advantage is that with Tokyo Olympics being pushed back, NBC has nothing on the calendar.
Okay.
Right. So you could easily slot a potential cup in during that time frame and fill time for NBC. In addition, most arenas and stadiums have open dates now because most concerts or other events that were scheduled in those locales have been canceled as well. So you could slide into that open spot, but the downside risk is you're now starting your following season very late.
Sure.
And in addition, you're finishing off during the summer where you have to worry about the arenas themselves being able to handle ice during the middle of summer.
I mean, I'm okay with, just keep pushing it as far as you need to push it, and let's just take 20 games off of next season.
I think there's nothing that's off the table right now. And I think it all depends on how long it takes us to get our arms around the potential absence and for a decision to be made. The longer the indefinite period goes where we don't know, I think the harder it's going to be to make those kind of decisions and determine whether or not you're going to move it, keep moving it out indefinitely.
Yep.
You have to have a cutoff point and end date at some point in time.
Yeah, hopefully if we get the green light about Easter and some of the country can kind of go back to as normal as possible, then I think that's when we'll start hearing, the other leagues start to have press conferences or come out with statements. So,
yep.
And you know what they could do is they can just also limit ticket sales. Make sure that they don't sell seats. Like if you've got a row of 15, all right, well, in this row, we can sell 4 across, but then there has to be, 2 seats empty, and then we can sell the other 4. You get what I'm saying? So there's got to be separation between people who buy tickets.
Agreed.
Okay. All right, Jan, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.